The snow didn't announce itself with drama. It didn't howl or slam into windows. It simply arrived, quiet and steady, as if the city had agreed not to notice. By the time Renee Wallace stepped off the bus on West 114th Street, the sidewalk had turned into a pale sheet of ice. The streetlights glowed softly through the falling flakes, and her breath came out in short, cloudy bursts. She adjusted the strap of her worn handbag on her shoulder and glanced at her phone. The screen was cracked, spiderwebbed at the corner, and the time blinked back at her with quiet accusation. Late again. Renee tightened her scarf and started walking faster, careful not to slip. The wind cut through her coat like it had been waiting all morning for her. Underneath, she wore the same gray sweater she saved for workdays. It wasn't thick and it wasn't new, but it was clean. That mattered in the houses she cleaned. At 42, Renee had learned which details people noticed and which ones they didn't. She passed shuttered storefronts and parked cars already dusted white. A man jogged past her with headphones in, his shoes crunching confidently through the snow. Renee watched him for a second, then looked back down, focusing on her steps. Falling wasn't an option. A twisted ankle could mean missed work, and missed work meant questions she didn't have answers for. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't check it. If it was Mrs. Caldwell, she already knew what it would say. The brownstones grew taller and cleaner as she moved west. The sidewalks here were shoveled faster. The snow didn't linger as long. Renee noticed things like that. She noticed who got warmth without asking. As she crossed the street near a closed cafe, something dark by the doorway caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a trash bag blown out of place. The city left things behind all the time. Then it moved. Just a little. A shift. A sound that didn't belong to the wind. Renee slowed, her boots scraping softly. The shape was a man. Curled slightly on his side, coat half open, one arm tucked awkwardly beneath him. Snow clung to his hair and shoulders as if he'd been there a while. She stopped walking. A couple passed behind her, laughing about something on a phone screen. Another man stepped over the stranger's foot without looking down. No one broke stride. Renee stood there, heart thudding harder than it should have. Her first thought was practical. She didn't have time for this. She was already late. She wasn't trained for emergencies. And sometimes people didn't want help. But the man's chest rose and fell unevenly. His breath made a thin, broken sound. Renee took a step closer. "Sir?" she said, keeping her voice light as if that might make this simpler. "Hey, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. Pale eyes opened halfway, unfocused. His lips moved, but no clear words came out. His hands were bare, skin red and stiff, fingers trembling like they weren't quite listening to him anymore. Renee swallowed. This wasn't sleep. This wasn't someone resting. The cold seemed sharper now, biting at her ears, her cheeks. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen, thumb hovering. 1,000 small fears rushed in. What if she was wrong? What if she made things worse? What if help didn't come in time? She knelt beside him anyway, her knees soaking through her pants. "Help's coming," she said, though she hadn't called yet. Saying it out loud felt like a promise she could still keep. The man's eyes shifted toward her. For a brief second there was something like embarrassment there. Or maybe regret. Then his teeth began to chatter so hard his jaw clicked. Renee looked down at him, then at herself. The sweater pressed warm against her skin beneath her coat. Her only decent one. The one she planned to wear all day. She hesitated, fingers frozen at the zipper, her mind racing through reasons not to do this. Rent, work, pride, fear. And then she remembered how the city felt when no one stopped. She took a breath, long and shaky, and unzipped her coat. As she pulled the sweater over her head, the cold rushed in, sharp enough to steal the air from her lungs. Her hands fumbled as she draped it over the man's shoulders, tucking it around his chest as best she could. His eyes widened slightly. His mouth opened. "Didn't mean to," he whispered. "Don't talk," Renee said softly, even as her teeth began to chatter now too. "Just stay with me." Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, faint but growing louder. Renee stayed kneeling there, snow soaking through her clothes, her bare arms burning from the cold, watching a stranger she didn't know struggle to breathe. And if you've ever wondered how one small decision can change everything, you might want to stay with this story. Sometimes the quiet moments matter most. The siren drew closer. Renee didn't know yet that this morning would follow her for the rest of her life. And the man in the snow hadn't opened his eyes all the way. The city didn't pause just because someone was lying on the ground. While Renee knelt in the snow, the rest of the morning continued like clockwork. Cars crawled past with headlights on, tires hissing through slush. Somewhere above them, a subway train rumbled, metal screeching against metal. A delivery truck double-parked at the corner, the driver already irritated, already late. The man beneath the sweater shivered violently now. His breathing came in shallow bursts, each one sounding thinner than the last. Renee kept her hand near his shoulder without fully touching him, afraid that moving him the wrong way might hurt him. "You're not alone," she said, more to steady herself than him. A woman in a long coat slowed as she passed, glanced down, then looked away. A man on his phone stepped around them, annoyance flashing across his face like Renee was blocking traffic instead of kneeling beside a human being. Renee noticed all of it. She noticed how easy it was to pretend not to see. How practiced people were at stepping around problems that didn't belong to them. Her arms ached from the cold now. The skin on her forearms burned, then dulled, the sensation fading in a way that scared her. She rubbed her hands together, breath coming faster. The sirens were louder now. Close. The man's eyes fluttered again. He tried to shift, failed, and let out a sound that made Renee's chest tighten. "Hey," she said quickly. "Stay still. They're almost here." His gaze drifted past her, unfocused, as if he was looking at something she couldn't see. Snow clung to his eyelashes. For a moment she wondered who he was when he wasn't here. What kind of life he stepped out of that morning. The coat he wore had once been expensive. It still smelled faintly of something clean, something deliberate. Not like the streets. That confused her. 2 EMTs arrived at a jog, bright jackets cutting through the white. They moved with calm efficiency, kneeling beside the man, asking questions even before Renee finished standing up. "How long has he been out here?" one of them asked. "I don't know," Renee said. Her voice shook more than she expected. "I just found him." They worked quickly, checking vitals, slipping oxygen over his face. One of them glanced up at Renee. "Did you give him that sweater?" Renee nodded. "Good," the EMT said. "Probably helped more than you know." They lifted the man onto a stretcher. As they did, the sweater slipped slightly, exposing his blue-tinged wrist. Renee reached forward without thinking and tucked it back around him. For a brief second, his fingers brushed hers. Cold. Barely there. Then they wheeled him toward the ambulance. Doors slammed. Sirens cut through the air again, louder this time, closer to her chest. Renee stood there, suddenly unsure what to do with her hands. Without the sweater, the cold felt personal. It crawled under her coat, down her spine, settling into places she couldn't shake. "Ma'am," one of the EMTs said. "Do you know him?" She shook her head. No. The word felt strange in her mouth. No, she didn't know him. And yet, something about leaving felt wrong. The ambulance pulled away, red lights bleeding into the falling snow. And just like that, it was over. People filled the space again. Someone complained about the traffic. Another person laughed too loudly. The cafe remained closed, its windows dark. Renee looked down at the patch of snow where he'd been lying. Already it looked ordinary. She checked her phone. Several missed calls now. Her stomach twisted. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. By the time she reached Riverside Drive, the houses stood tall and silent, their steps already cleared. Warmth waited behind thick doors. Order. Expectation. Inside the Caldwell house, the heat wrapped around her instantly. Renee's fingers tingled painfully as feeling returned. She swallowed a gasp and forced herself to move normally. Mrs. Caldwell was already in the kitchen, sipping coffee, scrolling through her tablet. "You're late," she said without looking up. "I know," Renee replied. "I'm sorry." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes flicked briefly to Renee's arms, bare beneath the coat. "Aren't you cold?" she asked. Renee hesitated. "Yes." Pause. "Not long. Just enough." "Well, Mrs. Caldwell said, returning to her screen. "Try not to let it affect your work." Renee nodded and headed for the sink. As she scrubbed, the image of pale eyes in the snow kept replaying in her mind. The way his hand felt. The way the city moved on. And somewhere, inside an ambulance racing through traffic, her sweater was wrapped around a man whose name she didn't know. She didn't know then that this wasn't the end of that morning. It was only the part the city forgot. Renee didn't feel warm again until late that night. Not the kind of warm that comes from stepping indoors, but the deeper kind, the kind that reaches places the cold had settled into and refused to leave. Even then it came slowly, painfully, like her body didn't trust it. After finishing her shift, she rode the bus back across the city, shoulders hunched, coat zipped to her chin. The windows were fogged from breath and damp clothes. Someone's wet boots smelled faintly of metal and salt. A child cried 2 rows up, tired and sharp-voiced. Renee stared at her reflection in the glass, watching the streetlights smear into yellow lines behind her. Her arms still tingled where the sweater had been. At home, her apartment greeted her with silence. The radiator knocked once, then twice before deciding to cooperate. She set her bag down and stood in the middle of the living room, unsure what to do next. Usually she went straight for the shower. Usually she put water on for tea. Usually routine carried her through the evenings like rails on a track. Tonight she just stood there. When she finally sat on the edge of her bed, the image returned without warning. Pale eyes. Frost in eyelashes. A hand brushing hers, light as if it belonged to someone already halfway gone. She pressed her palms together hard. "Stop," she whispered to the empty room. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. She flinched, then checked the screen. A missed call from Janelle's school. Renee closed her eyes. She called back immediately, pacing as it rang. A tired-sounding administrator explained that Janelle had been distracted in class again, that her grades were slipping, that they wanted to schedule a meeting. "I'll come," Renee said quickly. "I'll make time." After she hung up, she sank back onto the bed, the weight of everything pressing down at once. Work, money, worry. And now this man in the snow, lodged in her thoughts like a splinter she couldn't reach. She wondered if he'd survived the ride to the hospital. She wondered if anyone would call her if he didn't. The thought made her chest tighten in a way she didn't like. In the shower, hot water stung her skin, turning it pink. She watched the steam rise, trying to focus on the present moment. The sound of water, the echo of the small bathroom, the way her fingers finally stopped shaking. But even there, she caught herself listening for sirens. Later, wrapped in an old blanket on the couch, she tried to distract herself with television. The news murmured on about weather delays, traffic accidents, market updates. Faces flashed across the screen. None of them were his. She told herself that was good. The next morning came too quickly. Renee woke before her alarm, heart already racing. For a split second, she thought she was still kneeling in the snow. It took a moment to recognize her ceiling, the crack near the corner, the familiar hum of the radiator. She sat up slowly. Her sweater was gone. The absence felt heavier than she expected. She opened her closet, stared at the empty hanger, then closed it again. It was foolish to feel this way over a piece of clothing, she told herself. Things were replaceable. People weren't. At work, Mrs. Caldwell commented again. "You should dress warmer," she said, handing Renee a list of tasks without meeting her eyes. "This weather isn't forgiving." Renee nodded, biting back a response that rose too quickly to be useful. The day passed in fragments. Dusting shelves she'd dusted 100 times before. Folding clothes that weren't hers. Polishing silver she would never use. Her hands moved automatically while her mind drifted back to the cafe doorway, the way the snow had piled up quietly without permission. On her lunch break, she checked her phone. No missed calls. No unknown numbers. Relief and disappointment tangled together in her chest. That night, as she sorted laundry in the basement room, she found herself holding the letter opener she kept on the small desk. Turning it over. Setting it down. Picking it up again. She didn't know why. She hadn't received any mail worth opening in weeks. As she climbed into bed, she told herself she'd done what she could. That the city was full of stories she'd never know the ending to. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, one thought surfaced and refused to sink. What if this wasn't finished with her yet? Renee learned quickly that doing the right thing didn't come with relief. If anything, the days after felt heavier. Not dramatic. Just heavier, like carrying an extra bag she hadn't packed for but couldn't put down. She moved through her routine with the same precision as always, but there was a thin layer of distraction over everything, like static she couldn't tune out. On the fourth morning after the snowstorm, she took a longer route to the bus stop without realizing it. When she noticed, she stopped short. The closed cafe was a block away. She stood there, the cold air filling her lungs, and told herself she was being ridiculous. Still, her feet carried her forward. The sidewalk was clear now. No snow piled against the door. No dark shape by the entrance. Just a chalkboard sign turned sideways and a faded sticker on the glass advertising coffee that hadn't been served in years. Renee stared at the spot where he'd been lying. It looked smaller than she remembered. She waited, not knowing for what. A sign. A feeling. Something that would tell her this wasn't all in her head. Nothing came. On the bus, she caught her reflection again and barely recognized it. Same face, same tired eyes, but there was a new tightness around her mouth. Like she was bracing for something. At work, Mrs. Caldwell was in an unusually sharp mood. "The towels are folded wrong," she said, flicking the edge of one with her finger. "And you missed a spot on the mirror upstairs." "I'll redo it," Renee said. "I don't understand how standards slip so quickly," Mrs. Caldwell continued, voice calm but edged. "When I hired you, you were very reliable." The word landed harder than it should have. Renee swallowed. It won't happen again. She redid the towels. She cleaned the mirror. She stayed quiet. But the truth was, her focus kept drifting. Every time the doorbell rang, her chest tightened. Every time a phone buzzed, even if it wasn't hers, her heart jumped. By mid-afternoon, her hands ached from clenching and unclenching without her noticing. During her break, she sat on the basement steps with a cup of lukewarm coffee and checked her phone again. Still nothing. No calls from unknown numbers. No messages. No news alerts that caught her attention. She scrolled anyway, past weather updates and local headlines. A man in critical condition found outdoors. She stopped breathing. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She clicked. The article was short. Vague. It mentioned a middle-aged man found suffering from exposure near a closed business on the Upper West Side. Condition stabilized. No further details available. No name. No picture. Renee leaned her head back against the cool concrete wall, letting out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Stabilized meant alive. For now. Relief washed through her, followed quickly by something else. A strange, unwanted sense of attachment. As if knowing he'd survived obligated her to keep caring. That night she called Janelle. Her daughter's voice came through the phone, bright but distracted, words tumbling over each other as she talked about a school project, a friend who might move away, a teacher who talked too fast. Renee listened, smiling softly, picturing Janelle's face. "You sound tired," Janelle said suddenly. Renee hesitated. "Just work." There was a pause on the line. "You always say that." Renee closed her eyes. "I know." She thought about telling her everything. About the man. About the sweater. About how close the city had come to swallowing someone whole. But she didn't. After the call, Renee sat in the quiet, staring at the folded blanket on her couch. She thought about how thin the line was between needing help and receiving it. About how easily things slipped through cracks when no one was looking. That night, she dreamed of snow falling indoors, covering furniture, climbing the walls. In the dream, she tried to sweep it away, but it kept coming. She woke before dawn, heart racing. Her phone lay on the nightstand, dark and silent. For reasons she couldn't explain, she picked it up and checked her messages one more time. There was a new notification. An envelope icon. Renee sat up slowly, staring at the screen, her breath shallow. Someone had sent her a letter. And she didn't yet know why. Renee didn't open the message right away. She sat on the edge of her bed, phone in both hands, staring at the envelope icon like it might disappear if she waited too long. Outside, the city was just beginning to wake up. A car horn blared somewhere down the street. The radiator hissed, then went quiet. She told herself it was probably nothing. A spam message. A wrong address. A school notification she'd forgotten about. Still, her thumb hovered. When she finally tapped the screen, it wasn't an email. It was a notification from her building's front desk system. There was mail waiting for her. A physical letter. Marked urgent. Renee let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. That made more sense. And somehow it didn't. All through the morning, the thought followed her. She moved through her routine in fragments, brushing her teeth, pulling on her coat, locking the door, each task slightly out of order. She nearly forgot her keys. She missed the first bus. At work, Mrs. Caldwell was hosting a luncheon. The house buzzed with quiet activity. Caterers moved in and out. Glassware clinked. Renee wiped surfaces that were already clean, her mind elsewhere. She checked the time more often than she needed to. "Is there something you'd like to share?" Mrs. Caldwell asked sharply at one point. Renee blinked. "No, ma'am." "Then please focus," Mrs. Caldwell said, her smile thin. Renee nodded and did exactly what was expected of her. She always did. But the anticipation sat heavy in her chest, tightening with every passing hour. By the time she was released for the day, the sky had already darkened. The cold had returned, sharper now, as if reminding her of something unfinished. She stopped by the front desk on her way into the building. The attendant slid a thick envelope across the counter without comment. Cream-colored. Heavier than she expected. Her name was written neatly across the front. Renee carried it upstairs like it might break. Inside her apartment, she set the envelope on the table and stood over it for a long moment. The handwriting wasn't familiar. No return address. No stamp that gave anything away. She thought about the article she'd read. Stabilized. She thought about the EMT's voice. Probably helped more than you know. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Folded carefully. No letterhead. No logo. She unfolded it slowly. The words were handwritten. "I don't know your name, but I know your sweater saved my life." Renee sank into the chair. The room felt very quiet all at once. "I was told someone found me in the snow and gave me their clothing. They didn't have your information. They said you left before anyone could ask." Her eyes moved down the page, her breathing shallow. "I woke up in the hospital not knowing why I was alive. A nurse mentioned the sweater. That someone stayed with me. That someone didn't have to." Renee pressed her hand to her mouth. "I've been trying to find you ever since." There was no apology. No explanation. No dramatic language. Just simple sentences, written carefully, as if the person behind them didn't trust themselves not to overstep. "If this letter reaches you, please know that I am alive because of you." At the bottom was a single initial. D. Renee read it again. Then again. Her chest ached in a way she couldn't name. She hadn't known how much space the question had been taking up in her until it finally had an answer. Alive. He was alive. She folded the letter and held it against her palm, feeling the faint ridges of ink through the paper. For a moment she laughed softly. Just once. A sound halfway between relief and disbelief. Then reality crept back in. He was alive. And he had found her. She stood and paced the small apartment, the letter still in her hand. Questions rose up one after another. How had he tracked her down? Who had helped him? Why now? And what did he want? Renee sat back down and read the letter one last time, slower this time, searching for anything she'd missed. There was no request. No number to call. No address. Just gratitude. She folded the letter carefully and slid it into the drawer where she kept her Bible and important documents. Somewhere safe. Somewhere quiet. That night, she lay awake listening to the wind rattle the windows. The cold had returned, pressing against the glass like a memory. She wondered what D stood for. She wondered if this was the end of it. And deep down she sensed it wasn't. Renee tried to let the letter be enough. That was the plan, at least. She told herself she didn't need anything more than the knowledge that the man had survived. That the moment had mattered. That a choice made in the cold hadn't vanished into nothing. But knowing and feeling were two different things. The letter stayed where she'd put it, tucked between documents that represented survival. Lease agreements, school forms, a folded pay stub she kept as proof she'd once been ahead of a bill. Every morning for the next few days, she told herself she wouldn't look at it again. Every morning she did. She never took it out. She didn't reread the words. She just opened the drawer slightly, enough to see the corner of the envelope, enough to reassure herself that it was real. At work, life continued with the same expectations and the same quiet pressures. Mrs. Caldwell was planning a spring fundraiser now. There were guest lists to review, closets to reorganize, instructions delivered in clipped sentences that assumed obedience as a given. Renee followed them all. But something in her had shifted just slightly. Not confidence. Not defiance. More like awareness. She noticed how often she was spoken to without being looked at. How frequently her name was replaced with, "Can you just," or "while you're here." She noticed how people assumed availability was the same thing as willingness. On her lunch break one afternoon, she sat by the small basement window and watched snowmelt drip steadily from a gutter outside. The sound was rhythmic, almost soothing. Drip, drip, drip. She found herself wondering what the man was doing at that exact moment. If he was still in the hospital. If he had visitors. If he'd gone back to whatever life had led him to that sidewalk. The letter hadn't explained that part. She thought about writing back, then stopped herself. She didn't have an address. And even if she did, what would she say? "You're welcome" felt too small. "I hope you're okay" felt like an invitation she wasn't sure she wanted to extend. One evening, as she was sorting laundry, Mrs. Caldwell's voice drifted down the stairs. "Renee? When you're done, I need you upstairs." Renee wiped her hands on her pants and went. Mrs. Caldwell stood in the living room, arms crossed, surveying the space with dissatisfaction that seemed to have no clear source. "I've been thinking," she said. "I may start traveling more this year. Which means I'll need flexibility." Renee nodded slowly. "Of course. That might mean longer hours some weeks," Mrs. Caldwell continued. "And possibly fewer others. I trust that won't be an issue." It wasn't phrased as a question. Renee felt the familiar tightening in her chest. The instinct to agree immediately, to smooth things over before friction could form. But the letter flashed through her mind. The simple handwriting. The certainty in those words. She took a breath. "I'll need notice," she said carefully. "For my daughter." Mrs. Caldwell looked surprised, then mildly annoyed. "Well," she said, "we'll discuss it later." The conversation ended there, but the feeling lingered. That night, Renee called Janelle again. They talked about homework, about a teacher who didn't explain things clearly, about a rumor going around school that Renee only half followed. "You ever think about doing something different?" Janelle asked suddenly. Renee smiled into the phone. "Different how?" "I don't know," Janelle said. "Just different." Renee didn't answer right away. She looked around her apartment. The chipped table, the old couch, the stack of unopened mail on the counter. "Sometimes," she said honestly. After the call, she stood at the window and watched people hurry along the sidewalk below. Everyone seemed to know where they were going. Everyone looked busy enough to be important. Her phone buzzed. This time it wasn't the school. It wasn't a bill reminder. It was a number she didn't recognize. Renee stared at it as it rang. Once, twice. She almost let it go to voicemail. Habit urged her to avoid unknown calls, to protect herself from disappointment or trouble. But something else, curiosity maybe, or that quiet awareness she couldn't shake, made her answer. "Hello," she said. There was a brief pause on the other end. A breath. "Ms. Wallace?" a man's voice asked. "Come." Measured. Not rushed. Renee's grip tightened on the phone. "Yes," she said. "This is Thomas Reed," the voice continued. "I'm calling on behalf of someone who believes you may have helped him during a medical emergency earlier this year." Renee closed her eyes. The letter hadn't been the end after all. And suddenly she wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or afraid. Renee didn't speak right away. The name Thomas Reed meant nothing to her, but the way he said her last name did. Careful. Deliberate. Like he already knew more about her than she was comfortable with. "Yes," she said again, slower this time. "I helped someone. That's all." "I understand," the man replied. His voice was steady, professional, the kind that didn't rush because it never had to. "First, let me assure you, you're not in any trouble. Quite the opposite." Renee shifted the phone against her ear and moved closer to the window, lowering her voice without fully realizing it. "Then why are you calling me?" There was a pause. "Just long enough to feel intentional. The man you helped has been trying to find you for some time," Thomas said. "He wanted to thank you personally." Renee let out a breath through her nose. "Thank you." The word felt heavier now than it had on paper. "I already received a letter," she said. That was enough. "I was told about the letter," Thomas replied. "But he hopes to speak with you directly. Only if you're willing." Renee looked down at the street below. A woman tugged a child along by the hand, both bundled in coats too big for them. A delivery worker struggled with a hand truck, wheels rattling over cracked pavement. Life continuing. "When?" Renee asked. "Whenever is convenient for you," Thomas said. "We can meet somewhere public. Neutral. A cafe, perhaps." Renee hesitated. Every instinct she had told her to say no. She didn't owe anyone her time. She didn't want complications. She had enough of those already. But the thought of hanging up without answers felt wrong. "Where?" she asked. They settled on a small cafe near Central Park. 2 days later. Late afternoon. After the call ended, Renee stayed by the window long after the screen went dark. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes searching, mouth pressed thin. She hadn't planned for this part. At work the next day she was quieter than usual. Mrs. Caldwell noticed. "You seem distracted," she said while inspecting a freshly cleaned countertop. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, ma'am," Renee replied automatically. Mrs. Caldwell studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "Just make sure it doesn't affect your work." Renee nodded, though her thoughts were already elsewhere. On the meeting. On the man whose initials she still didn't understand. On what it meant that someone like Thomas Reed existed in his orbit. The day of the meeting arrived colder than expected. The sky hung low and gray, threatening snow but never quite committing. Renee stood in front of her mirror longer than usual, adjusting her coat, smoothing her hair back with hands that felt clumsier than normal. She chose neutral clothes. Nothing new. Nothing worn out. Clothes that wouldn't say too much one way or the other. On the bus ride over, she practiced what she might say. She'd done what anyone decent would do. She didn't need thanks. She didn't need explanations. But she knew that wasn't entirely true. The cafe was warm and crowded, the air thick with the smell of coffee and damp coats. Renee arrived 10 minutes early and chose a small table near the window. She ordered a single cup and wrapped her hands around it, letting the heat sink into her palms. She checked the time. 4 minutes early now. The door opened, letting in a rush of cold air and muted street noise. A man stepped inside, scanning the room. Well-dressed. Clean-cut. He looked like he belonged in boardrooms, not hospital waiting rooms. His eyes landed on her. He smiled politely and walked over. "Ms. Wallace?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm Thomas Reed," he said, extending his hand. His handshake was brief, professional. He took the seat across from her without being invited, but not rudely. "He'll be here shortly," Thomas said. Renee nodded, her stomach tightening. "He." Thomas glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Donovan." The name still didn't mean anything to her. They sat in silence for a moment. Around them cups clinked. Someone laughed. A barista called out an order. "He's nervous," Thomas said quietly. Renee raised an eyebrow. "So am I." Thomas smiled faintly. "That's understandable." The door opened again. This time Renee felt it before she saw him. A shift in the room. Not attention exactly, something subtler. A man stepped inside, brushing snow from his coat. He looked healthy. Rested. Taller than she remembered. Or maybe he'd always been that tall, and the ground had just evened things out before. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered across his face, quick and unmistakable. He walked toward her slowly, as if afraid she might disappear if he moved too fast. Renee stood without thinking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "Hi," he said finally. His voice was stronger now. Warmer. Renee searched his face for the man she'd knelt beside in the snow. She found him in the eyes. Only there. "You're alive," she said. He nodded. "Because of you." She swallowed. He gestured toward the chair. "May I?" She sat back down. As he took the seat across from her, Renee realized something unsettling. Whatever this meeting was about, it wasn't just gratitude. And whatever he was about to say next was going to change how she understood that morning forever. For a few seconds after Donovan sat down, no one spoke. The cafe noise filled the space between them. Steam hissing, chairs scraping, someone arguing softly over a wrong order. Renee noticed everything and nothing at once. The way Donovan held his cup with both hands. The faint scar along his knuckle. How his coat looked expensive without trying to. This was not the man from the snow. And yet it was. "I didn't know how to start," Donovan said at last. His voice was steady, but his eyes kept flicking to her hands, as if he were afraid she might pull them away. "So I'll just say it plainly. Thank you for stopping." Renee nodded once. She didn't trust herself to say more yet. "I've replayed that morning 100 times, he continued. "Mostly the parts one don't remember. I had to rely on what other people told me. The EMTs, a nurse. They all said the same thing. That someone stayed when they didn't have to." Renee glanced briefly at Thomas, who sat slightly turned away now, pretending to check his phone. Giving them space without leaving. "I didn't stay long," Renee said. "I called for help. That was it." Donovan smiled faintly. "You gave me your sweater." She shifted in her seat. "It was cold." "It was the difference," he said quietly. The word landed heavier than she expected. Difference. Like it implied something larger than a single moment. Like it asked for meaning she wasn't sure she wanted to give. Donovan reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Thicker than the letter she'd received. He placed it gently on the table between them. Renee didn't touch it. "I don't want this to feel like an obligation," he said quickly, noticing her expression. "If you don't want it, I'll take it back. No questions." "What is it?" she asked. "A check," he said. "For the inconvenience. The sweater. The time. She raised a hand. "No." The word came out sharper than she intended. A few heads turned in their direction, then looked away. Donovan froze. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean." "I didn't do it for money," Renee said. Her voice was lower now, controlled, but there was something tight underneath it. "And I don't want it turned into that." He studied her, really looked at her this time. The tired lines around her eyes. The way her coat was frayed at the cuff. "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to give it to you." Renee shook her head. "You don't fix something like that with a check." Thomas shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable now. Donovan leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. "Then let me say this another way. I'm not used to people doing things for me without expecting something in return. It caught me off guard." "That's not my problem," Renee said, then softened. I'm glad you're okay. Truly. But I don't want this to be more than it was." Donovan nodded slowly. "I hear you." For a moment, Renee thought that might be the end of it. That he'd stand up, thank her again, and leave her with the coffee she couldn't afford and a strange story she'd never fully explained to anyone. Instead, he said, "Can I ask you something?" She hesitated. "Depends." "Why did you stop?" The question was simple. Too simple. Renee looked down at the table, at a small chip in the wood filled with years of spills. She thought about the people who'd walked past. About how close she'd come to doing the same. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I saw you breathing like it hurt. And I thought, if that was me, I'd want someone to notice." Donovan swallowed. "I wasn't supposed to be there," he said suddenly. Renee looked up. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand over his face as if deciding how much to say. "I walked. Too far. Without paying attention. I didn't care what happened." The words sat between them, heavy and unfinished. Renee felt a flicker of something she didn't expect. Not pity. Not anger. Recognition. "People don't end up on sidewalks like that for no reason," she said quietly. Donovan met her gaze. For the first time since he'd sat down, his composure cracked. Just a little. No, he said. They don't. Thomas cleared his throat softly, glancing at his watch. We should be mindful of time. Donovan nodded, but his eyes stayed on Renee. I don't want to intrude on your life, he said. But if you ever need anything, work, help, anything at all, please let me know. Renee stood. I appreciate the offer, she said carefully. But I don't think that's a good idea. Donovan looked surprised. Why? Because it felt uneven. Because power had a way of distorting gratitude. Because she didn't want to owe him anything. I don't know you, she said simply. He smiled then. Not offended. Almost impressed. That's fair, he said. They said their goodbyes politely. Too politely. As Renee stepped back into the cold, she felt the weight of the meeting settle into her chest. She hadn't taken the check. She hadn't accepted help. But as she walked toward the bus stop, one thought refused to let go. Whatever Donovan hadn't told her yet mattered. Renee thought the meeting would fade with time. That was what usually happened. Moments flared, then dimmed, then settled into memory like everything else. She told herself this one would be no different. A strange morning. An unexpected letter. A conversation over coffee that would eventually turn into a story she told no one. But the days after refused to smooth themselves out. At work, Mrs. Caldwell was suddenly everywhere. Watching. Commenting. Asking questions that weren't really questions. You used a different cleaner in the guest bathroom, she said one afternoon, fingers tracing the counter as if searching for flaws. Why? It was empty, Renee replied evenly. I replaced it. Mrs. Caldwell pursed her lips. Next time ask. Renee nodded, though she couldn't remember the last time Mrs. Caldwell had asked her permission for anything. Down in the basement room later, folding sheets, Renee realized her shoulders were tight enough to ache. She paused, rolled them slowly, and forced herself to breathe. This had nothing to do with Donovan, she told herself. This was just work being work. Still, his face surfaced at odd moments. Not the healthy version from the cafe, but the one from the snow. The confusion. The way he'd said he didn't care what happened. That part stayed with her. One evening, as she was packing up to leave, Mrs. Caldwell called her into the living room again. I wanted to give you some notice, she said, scrolling through her phone. I've decided to list the house. Renee felt the words before she understood them. A hollow sensation opening in her chest. List it, she repeated. Yes, Mrs. Caldwell said as if discussing new curtains. The market is strong right now. I'll likely downsize. Maybe travel more. Renee nodded slowly. When? Sometime this spring, Mrs. Caldwell replied. I'll give you a recommendation, of course. But you'll need to find another position by summer. Another position. Another house. Another set of rules. Renee thanked her and went back downstairs, the noise of the house suddenly louder than usual. The vacuum hummed upstairs. Dishes clinked. A life that wasn't hers continued uninterrupted. In her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. She did the math automatically. Rent, utilities, food, bus fare, Janelle's school expenses. There wasn't room for gaps. There never was. She updated her resume that night, adjusting dates, rewriting responsibilities she'd memorized years ago. Domestic agencies responded with polite emails. We'll keep you on file. We'll reach out if something comes up. Nothing came up. A week passed. Then another. The letter from Donovan stayed in the drawer. She didn't open it anymore. She didn't need to. The words were already etched into her memory. One afternoon, as she waited for the bus, a news segment played on a screen inside the shelter. The volume was low, but the caption caught her eye. Business brief. Tech investor expands real estate portfolio. Renee looked up. The image on the screen sharpened into a familiar face. Donovan Hale. She froze. The anchor spoke about acquisitions, growth, philanthropy. A photograph flashed. Donovan in a suit, smiling confidently, surrounded by people who looked like they belonged exactly where they were. Billionaire investor Donovan Hale, the caption read. Renee's stomach dropped. She stared at the screen as the segment moved on, replaced by weather updates and traffic alerts. The bus arrived. People boarded. Renee stood there numb. That night she searched his name. Article after article appeared. Interviews, features, donations. A brief mention of a recent hospitalization following a personal incident. Personal incident. Her hands shook as she set the phone down. The man in the snow hadn't just been another struggling stranger. He had been someone with resources, with power, with a life so far removed from hers it felt unreal. And yet he'd still ended up on that sidewalk. The realization unsettled her more than the money ever could. Her phone rang. A known number. Renee stared at it, heart pounding. She knew who it was before she answered. And this time she wasn't sure she wanted to hear what he had to say. Renee let the phone ring until it stopped. The silence afterward felt louder than the ringing had been. She stood in the narrow kitchen, one hand resting on the counter, staring at the dark screen as if it might light up again on its own. Her heart was still pounding. She told herself she needed time. That answering right now would only pull her deeper into something she didn't understand yet. She wasn't used to powerful people calling her directly. She wasn't used to her small, carefully managed life intersecting with headlines and net worths. She turned the phone face down and forced herself to finish making dinner. Janelle arrived an hour later, dropping her backpack by the door and launching into a story about a group project gone wrong. Renee listened, nodding in the right places, smiling when appropriate, but her mind kept drifting. "Mom," Janelle said suddenly. "You okay?" Renee blinked. "Yeah. Just tired." Janelle studied her for a second, then shrugged and headed to her room. Renee exhaled slowly. She hated how easy it was for her daughter to notice when something was off. Later that night, after dishes were done and the apartment had settled into its usual quiet, Renee picked up her phone again. There was a voicemail. She hesitated, then pressed play. "Ms. Wallace," a familiar voice said. Donovan's voice. Calm, careful. "I hope I'm not calling too late. I wanted to explain some things. I realized after our meeting that I wasn't entirely honest. Not with you and not with myself." Renee closed her eyes. "I understand if you don't want to speak again," he continued. "But if you're willing, I'd appreciate the chance. No pressure. I'll wait." The message ended. Renee sat down heavily on the couch. Her chest felt tight, not with fear exactly, but with something closer to disappointment. Not in him, but in the realization that she'd sensed this already. That he'd been holding something back. She thought about the news segment. The word billionaire. The way his offer at the cafe suddenly made more sense and less at the same time. Power changed things. It always did. She didn't call him back that night. Instead, she opened the drawer and took out the letter for the first time since the meeting. She read it slowly, paying attention to what wasn't there. No mention of money. No mention of status. Just a man trying to anchor himself to a moment that had kept him alive. That part felt real. The rest, she wasn't sure yet. The next morning, Renee woke early and made coffee she barely tasted. She watched the city come to life through the window, the same way she had every morning for years. People heading to work. Delivery trucks unloading. A woman walking a dog that refused to move. Normal things. Her phone buzzed again. This time she answered. "Hello," she said. "Renee," Donovan said. He didn't sound surprised. Just relieved. "Thank you for picking up." "What didn't you tell me?" she asked, skipping everything else. There was a pause. A real one. "I didn't tell you who I am," he said quietly. "Not fully." "I know who you are," Renee replied. "Or at least I know what the internet says." Another pause. Longer. "That's not the part that matters," he said. "But it's part of why I was there that morning." Renee leaned back against the counter. "You ended up in the snow because you're rich?" A breath on the other end. Almost a laugh. But not quite. "No," Donovan said. "I ended up there because I didn't know how to live with myself anymore." She closed her eyes. "I wasn't running from danger," he continued. "I was running from consequences. From decisions I made that hurt people. Including my own family." Renee didn't interrupt. She'd learned long ago that people said more when you let silence do the work. "There are things I can fix with money," Donovan said. "And things I can't." That morning, I didn't want to go home to either. The words landed slowly, settling into her chest. And the check? She asked. The offer. That was habit, he admitted. I thought if I handled it the way I handle everything else, it would feel contained. Safer. For you, Renee said. Yes, he said softly. For me. She appreciated the honesty even as it unsettled her. What do you want now? She asked. To tell you the truth, Donovan replied. And then, to step back if that's what you want. Renee looked around her apartment. At the peeling paint near the window. At the stack of bills on the table. At the life she'd built piece by piece without shortcuts. She didn't know what she wanted yet. Meet me again, she said finally. No assistant. No envelopes. I can do that, Donovan said immediately. And this time, Renee added, don't leave anything out. There was a quiet relief in his voice when he answered. I won't. After the call ended, Renee stood there for a long moment, phone still in her hand. She had the strange feeling that she was standing at the edge of something bigger than gratitude. And once she stepped forward, there would be no pretending this was just a story about a sweater anymore. Renee chose the place this time. Not a cafe. Not anywhere polished or quiet. She picked a diner off Route 9 that smelled like burned coffee and disinfectant, the kind of place where no one lingered long enough to overhear anything meaningful. She arrived 10 minutes early and took a booth near the window. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the curb, gray and tired. Inside, a waitress refilled mugs without asking names. When Donovan walked in, Renee almost didn't recognize him. No suit. No tailored coat. Just a worn jacket, jeans, and boots that looked like they'd actually seen weather. His hair was unstyled, his face bare of the composed confidence she'd seen online. He looked careful. He spotted her, hesitated for a fraction of a second, then came over. Thank you for meeting me, he said. Renee nodded. Sit. They ordered without ceremony. Coffee for both. Pancakes he barely touched. Renee noticed his hands as he poured syrup, steady now but faintly scarred, the kind of marks that came from years before boardrooms. She broke the silence. Start at the part you didn't tell me, she said. Donovan leaned back slightly, eyes dropping to the table. I was supposed to be in Aspen that week. A retreat. Advisors. Family. Supposed to be, Renee echoed. I left early, he said. Didn't tell anyone. Drove until I ran out of excuses. And ended up on a sidewalk, she said. Yes. Renee waited. My older brother died 2 months before that, Donovan continued. Car accident. Drunk driver. He was sober. Had been for years. I'm sorry, Renee said and meant it. Donovan nodded once. He worked for one of my companies. Not officially. He kept me human. Called me out when I cut corners. Renee's fingers tightened around her mug. The night before the retreat, Donovan said, I signed off on a settlement. It protected the company. It also buried evidence that could have helped another family. Renee felt a cold spread through her chest. You chose profit, she said quietly. I chose survival, he replied. For the company. For thousands of jobs. That's what I told myself. And your brother? Renee asked. His jaw tightened. He wouldn't have agreed. The diner noise seemed to fade around them. Plates clinked. A child laughed somewhere near the counter. Normal life pressing on, indifferent. So you walked, Renee said. Into the cold. I didn't plan to die, Donovan said. I just didn't care if I did. Renee looked at him fully now. Not the billionaire. Not the man from the screen. Just someone who had reached the edge and stepped past it. And when I gave you the sweater? She asked. His eyes lifted. That broke something open. Renee didn't smile. It was just a sweater. No, he said gently. It was a choice. You didn't know me. You didn't know me. And you still stayed. Renee shifted in her seat. That doesn't erase what you did. I know, Donovan said. That's why I'm here. The waitress came by refilling coffee. Renee waited until she walked away. What are you actually asking of me? Renee said. Because I won't be a conscience rental. And I won't be bought. Donovan nodded. I'm not asking you to forgive me. or to help me. Then what? I want you to know what you were part of, he said, and to know that I'm trying to undo the damage where I can. Trying how? Renee asked. He hesitated. Just a beat too long. There's a fund, he said. Quiet. Independent. 4 families affected by that settlement. Renee studied his face. Quiet means hidden. It means protected, he said. From who? She asked. Donovan didn't answer immediately. From my board, he said finally. And from people who think remorse is a liability. Renee leaned back. So you're still hiding? I'm surviving, he said again. But differently. She shook her head slowly. You're asking me to believe you've changed, while you're still choosing what truth gets seen. That's fair, he admitted. But change doesn't happen all at once. Renee thought of her mother, working 2 jobs and still finding time to braid her hair at night. Thought of Janelle, learning early how promises could dissolve. Why me? She asked. Donovan met her gaze. Because you didn't ask who I was before you helped me. And because you won't let me lie comfortably. Renee stood. I need time, she said. And space. I understand, Donovan replied, rising as well. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. There's something else, he said. Renee paused but didn't face him. The settlement, Donovan continued. It involves someone connected to you. Her breath caught. Connected how? She asked slowly. Donovan didn't answer right away. And suddenly, Renee understood why this story wasn't done with her yet. Renee didn't turn around. The words hung between them, heavy and unfinished. Someone connected to you. The diner noise rushed back in all at once, too loud, too sharp. Silverware scraped plates. The door chimed. Coffee poured. Connected how? She asked again, her voice steady only because she forced it to be. Donovan stood behind her. She could feel the space he kept, the care not to crowd her. When he spoke, it was quieter than before. Your sister, he said. By marriage. Renee's hand tightened around the strap of her bag. Say her name. Lisa, Donovan replied. Her husband worked maintenance at one of our logistics sites in Ohio. Renee turned then. Slowly. He died, she said flatly. Yes, Donovan said. 3 years ago. Equipment failure. Renee felt the air leave her lungs in a thin, controlled breath. The diner blurred at the edges. That case was settled, she said. They said it was an accident. Donovan's jaw set. It wasn't that simple. Renee stared at him, a distant roaring filling her ears. She remembered the phone call. Lisa's shaking voice. The funeral in the rain. The way Lisa had clutched her coat like it might disappear. She remembered the settlement check. Not big. Not small. Just enough to make questions feel expensive. You knew, Renee said. It wasn't a question. I didn't then, Donovan replied. Not personally. But I know now. And I know how it was handled. Renee stepped back. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. A couple in the next booth glanced over, then looked away. You don't get to tell me this like it's a footnote, Renee said. Her voice shook now, anger cutting through the shock. You don't get to frame this as regret. I'm not, Donovan said quickly. That's why I wanted to tell you before you heard it somewhere else. Before I found out you were part of why my sister barely sleeps? Renee shot back. Before I realized the man I helped survive a snowstorm was tied to the worst year of our lives? Donovan swallowed. Yes. Renee laughed once. It came out sharp, almost hysterical. Do you know how many nights I stayed at her place? How many times she asked if she should have pushed harder? If she'd missed something? I know, Donovan said quietly. Because her case is one of the ones I can't stop thinking about. That doesn't make it better, Renee said. That makes it worse. She walked out before he could respond. The cold outside hit her like a slap. She stood on the sidewalk, breathing hard, hands shaking so badly she had to press them against her thighs. Cars passed. Snowmelt splashed her shoes. Her phone buzzed. Lisa. Renee stared at the screen. For a moment she couldn't move. Then she answered. Hey, Lisa said. Her voice sounded tired. You busy? Renee closed her eyes. No. What's wrong? There was a letter, Lisa said. From a law firm. Says something about a review. I don't understand it. Renee's chest tightened. What kind of review? They said new information came up, Lisa replied. About the accident. Renee, they want to talk. Renee leaned against the brick wall of the diner, the rough texture grounding her. I'm coming over, she said. She took 2 buses across town. The ride felt endless. Her reflection in the window looked older than she remembered. Lisa's apartment smelled like reheated soup and laundry detergent. Papers were spread across the kitchen table. Legal language. Dates. Case numbers Renee recognized too well. They called it a closure before, Lisa said, sitting heavily. I tried to believe them. Renee picked up one of the pages. Donovan's company name was there, printed clean and official. He told me today, Renee said. Lisa looked up sharply. Told you what? Renee hesitated, then told her everything. Lisa listened without interrupting. Her face didn't change much, but her hands curled into fists in her lap. So, Lisa said finally, the man who froze in the snow, he's connected to this? Yes, Renee said. Directly. Lisa laughed softly. Figures. There was a knock at the door. They both froze. Another knock. Firmer. Renee moved toward the door, heart racing. She looked through the peephole. Donovan stood in the hallway. Not alone. 2 people in dark coats flanked him. One held a folder. Renee stepped back slowly, dread settling deep in her chest. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about truth anymore. And it was already at their door. Renee didn't open the door right away. She stood still, listening. The hallway outside was quiet except for the low hum of the building's old lights. No raised voices. No urgency. Just the presence of people who were used to being let in. Lisa moved beside her. Who is it? Renee kept her voice low. Donovan. And he brought company. Lisa's mouth tightened. Of course he did. Another knock, slower this time. Polite. Measured. Renee, Donovan called through the door. I know this isn't ideal, but we need to talk. All of us. About what? Renee called back. About reopening the case, he said. And about what happens next. Lisa let out a short breath. He doesn't get to decide that. Renee knew that. But she also knew something else. Donovan Hale didn't show up uninvited unless the situation had already moved beyond asking. She unlocked the door and opened it halfway. The 2 people with him stepped forward slightly, then stopped when Donovan raised a hand. One was a woman in her 40s, hair pulled back, eyes sharp but not unkind. The other was a younger man with a tablet tucked under his arm. This is Claire Benton, Donovan said. And this is Thomas Reed. They're not from my company. Claire nodded. Independent counsel, she said. 4 families impacted by unresolved workplace fatalities. Lisa crossed her arms. Funny how independence shows up with an escort. Claire didn't flinch. We asked Mr. Hale to introduce us. Not the other way around. Renee opened the door wider. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. They entered the small apartment carefully, like guests who knew they weren't welcome. Thomas glanced at the walls, the furniture, the framed photos of Lisa's husband. His gaze lingered there a second too long. Sit, Lisa said sharply, pointing at the table. They did. Claire opened the folder and slid a document across the table. We've uncovered maintenance logs that were altered after the accident, she said. They show prior complaints about the equipment. Lisa's breath hitched. We were told those didn't exist. They weren't supposed to, Claire replied. Renee watched Donovan closely. He said nothing. His eyes stayed on the table, jaw set. So what is this? Lisa asked. An apology tour? No, Claire said. It's an opportunity. The statute of limitations hasn't expired due to the nature of the concealment. You can reopen the case. And who pays? Lisa asked. Because I don't have money for another fight. Donovan finally spoke. I won't be funding the case, he said. Not directly. Lisa laughed, bitter. Of course not. But I will step aside, Donovan continued. No interference. No pressure. No settlements negotiated behind closed doors. Renee looked at him sharply. You expect us to trust that? No, he said. I expect you to verify it. Thomas leaned forward. There's more, he said. If this goes to court, other cases may surface, including one involving a domestic worker who was terminated after reporting unsafe conditions. Renee's stomach dropped. Where? She asked. Thomas glanced at Donovan, then back at her. In Connecticut. Private residence. Renee felt a cold spread through her chest. Mrs. Caldwell. The late-night chemicals. The faulty wiring. The time Renee had slipped on the stairs and been told not to document it. You're saying this is connected, Renee said slowly. I'm saying patterns repeat, Claire said. And silence helps them. Lisa pushed her chair back. So what, Renee? We become examples? Collateral? Renee didn't answer right away. Her mind raced. If this moved forward, it wouldn't stay contained. Employers, agencies, background checks. Her name would surface. Her job search was already thin. This could erase what little stability she had left. I didn't come here to hurt you, Donovan said quietly. I came because hiding is what caused this. Lisa stood. You don't get to decide when truth is convenient. Donovan met her gaze. I know. The room felt smaller. The air heavier. Claire closed the folder. You don't have to decide today, she said. But understand this, if you don't act, others may. And when that happens, you lose control of how your story is told. Renee thought of the snow, of the sweater, of a single decision that had rippled outward in ways she never imagined. She walked to the window and looked out at the street below. Kids riding bikes. A man walking his dog. Ordinary lives moving forward. What happens if we say yes? She asked without turning around. Claire's voice was steady. Everything gets harder before it gets honest. Renee closed her eyes. Behind her, she heard Donovan stand. And for the first time since that morning in the snow, she realized that helping him survive might cost her far more than a sweater ever had. Renee didn't sleep that night. She lay on her side, facing the wall, listening to the building breathe. Pipes knocking. A neighbor's television murmuring through thin walls. Somewhere outside, a siren rose and faded. Lisa had fallen asleep on the couch, an arm draped over her eyes. Exhaustion always took her hard like a switch flipping off. Renee envied that. Every time she closed her eyes, documents floated up behind her lids. Altered logs. Legal language. Mrs. Caldwell's house. The basement stairs. The way Mrs. Caldwell had once laughed when Renee mentioned a loose railing. It's been fine for years, she'd said. Just be careful. Careful. As if safety were a personal favor. At 3 in the morning, Renee sat up and reached for her phone. She didn't call anyone. She just scrolled through old photos she rarely looked at anymore. Her mother smiling with tired eyes. Janelle missing 2 front teeth. Lisa and her husband on a cheap beach trip, sunburned and laughing. Lives before fractures. By morning, Renee had made a decision. Not a final one, but a direction. Over coffee, she told Lisa she would speak to Claire again. Just to ask questions. Just to understand what yes would actually cost. Lisa stirred sugar into her mug too aggressively. I don't want you dragged into this, she said. You've already done enough for me. That's not how this works, Renee replied. If I stay quiet because it's safer, I'm still choosing something. Lisa looked at her for a long moment. I hate that he came into our lives like this. So do I, Renee said. But he didn't create the cracks. He just stepped into them. Claire met Renee later that afternoon at a small office near the courthouse. No signs. No receptionist. Just a waiting room with mismatched chairs and a pot of burnt coffee. Claire listened without interrupting as Renee talked. About Mrs. Caldwell. About the fall she never reported. About the agency that discouraged complaints because good placements are hard to replace. That's not unusual, Claire said. It's just rarely documented. What happens to people like me if this goes public? Renee asked. I'm not protected. I don't have savings. I don't have a backup. Claire nodded. You're right to ask that. There's risk. How much? Renee pressed. Enough that I won't pretend otherwise, Claire said. But there are protections we can pursue. Whistleblower statutes. Advocacy groups. Media if it comes to that. Renee exhaled. Media scares me more than court. It should, Claire said. Court has rules. Media has appetite. Renee thought of her name floating online, detached from context. Thought of Janelle reading comments she couldn't control. And Donovan? Renee asked. What's his role really? Claire paused. He's exposed. Not just financially. If this opens, his board may move to remove him. Renee raised an eyebrow. And he's still doing it. Yes, Claire said. Which doesn't make him good. But it does make him less protected. That night, Renee returned to Mrs. Caldwell's house for the last time. Mrs. Caldwell was away. The realtor's card sat on the counter, glossy and cheerful. Renee moved through the rooms methodically. The guest bathroom. The stairs. The laundry area where chemicals were stored without labels. She took photos. Quietly. Carefully. At the top of the basement stairs, she paused. The loose railing wobbled under her hand. She imagined slipping again. Imagined no one hearing. Imagined being told later that it was an accident. Her phone buzzed. A text from Donovan. I know you don't owe me updates, but my board found out about the review. They're not happy. Renee stared at the message. Another came through. They're asking questions about you. Her chest tightened. She finished what she was doing and left the house without looking back. Outside, the sky was already darkening, clouds heavy with the promise of more snow. For the first time since all this began, Renee felt something sharper than fear. Resolve. But as she unlocked her apartment door that evening, she noticed something new on the floor just inside. A plain white envelope. No stamp. No return address. Just her name written neatly across the front. And suddenly, Renee understood that someone else had already decided this story was moving forward, whether she was ready or not. Renee didn't open the envelope right away. She stood in the doorway, coat still on, keys in her hand, staring at it like it might move if she blinked. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. Lisa hadn't come back yet. Janelle was still at a friend's house. She bent down slowly and picked it up. The paper was thicker than standard mail. The weight inside uneven, as if something had been folded and refolded more than once. No seal. Just a tucked flap. Renee closed the door behind her and set the envelope on the kitchen table. She washed her hands first. An old habit, born from years of cleaning other people's messes before touching her own life. Then she opened it. Inside were photocopies. Emails. Internal memos. A scanned incident report with handwritten notes in the margins. Names were blacked out, but the dates were unmistakable. The logistics site in Ohio. The maintenance complaint logged 2 weeks before Lisa's husband died. The follow-up marked resolved, despite no evidence of repair. At the bottom of the stack was a single note. You're not the only one who knows. Be careful who you trust. Renee sat down hard. Her phone buzzed almost immediately, as if someone had been watching the moment she finished reading. Unknown number. She didn't answer. The phone rang again. Then stopped. A text followed. You have leverage. Use it wisely. Renee's pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't Donovan. He didn't play games like this. He faced things too directly, if anything. This was someone else. Someone inside the system. She gathered the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and tucked it into her bag. Her hands were steady now. Fear had a way of burning itself out when it stayed too long. When Lisa arrived later that night, Renee showed her everything. Lisa read in silence, jaw tight, eyes scanning every line. Someone's trying to scare you, Lisa said finally. Or help us, Renee replied. Or control the narrative. Lisa shook her head. I hate that we don't know which. Renee did too. The next day, Claire confirmed what Renee already suspected. These are real, Claire said after reviewing the documents. Or at least they're consistent with what we've found. Which means someone on the inside is leaking. Is that good? Renee asked. It's dangerous, Claire replied. For them. And for you. Donovan found out about the envelope that evening. Not from Renee. From his board. They think you're being used, he said over the phone. That someone is manipulating you to pressure me. And are they wrong? Renee asked. No, Donovan admitted. But they're also afraid. And fear makes people sloppy. What does that mean for me? Renee asked. Donovan hesitated. They may try to discredit you. The words settled heavily between them. How? Renee asked. Employment records, he said. Character claims. Framing you as unstable or opportunistic. Renee thought of Mrs. Caldwell. Of the agency. Of how easily a story could be rewritten if no one bothered to ask her side. So I'm a liability now, she said. Yes, Donovan replied. Which is why I need to ask you something difficult. Renee closed her eyes. Go on. If they offer you money, Donovan said, or a position or security, don't take it. She laughed softly. You think they'd offer me anything? They will, he said. To make this go away. Renee thought of the bills. The job search. The uncertainty pressing on her from every direction. And if I do, she asked. Then they win, Donovan said. And the truth disappears again. After the call, Renee sat alone at the table, the envelope between her hands. Power was pressing in on her from all sides now. Not loudly. Not violently. Quietly. Persistently. That night she wrote everything down. Every unsafe condition. Every conversation she could remember. Dates. Times. Names. She didn't know who had sent the envelope. But she knew one thing. Someone had decided she was the weak point. And Renee had spent her whole life learning how to survive exactly that kind of pressure. The question wasn't whether she'd break. It was how much damage would come before the truth finally surfaced. Renee lost her job 3 days later. It didn't come with drama. No raised voices. No accusations. Just a brief call from the agency, polite and rehearsed. Mrs. Caldwell has decided to move in a different direction, the coordinator said. She mentioned concerns about professionalism. Renee stood at the bus stop, phone pressed to her ear, watching traffic crawl past. Concerns like what? She asked. Pause. Papers shifting. She felt boundaries were blurred. Renee almost laughed. Boundaries? Yes, the woman replied. We'll note it in your file. The call ended. Renee didn't cry. She couldn't afford to. Crying took time and energy she needed for planning. She told Lisa that evening. Lisa swore under her breath and hugged her so tightly Renee's ribs ached. This is retaliation, Lisa said. Plain and simple. I know, Renee replied. But knowing doesn't stop rent. The agency emails stopped responding altogether. One domestic service removed her profile without explanation. Claire confirmed what Renee already suspected. They're building a narrative, Claire said. Unreliable. Emotional. Difficult. Renee listened quietly. She'd heard those words before. Not about herself, but about other women who dared to complain. What do we do? Renee asked. We document everything, Claire replied. And we move faster. Donovan called that night. They found out you were terminated, he said. My board is pleased. Renee's grip tightened on the phone. Of course they are. They think pressure will make you fold, Donovan continued. They're wrong. That depends, Renee said, on how much pressure you're willing to let them apply. There was a pause. I won't let them ruin your life, Donovan said. Renee's voice hardened. You don't get to decide that either. Another pause. Longer this time. You're right, he said. Then tell me what you need. She hesitated. Not because she didn't know, but because saying it out loud made it real. I need independence, Renee said. Not favors. Not protection. Space to stand without being crushed. I can help with that, Donovan said carefully. No, Renee replied. You can support the process without touching me. He understood. She could hear it in his exhale. The following week was a blur. Applications. Rejections. Side work cleaning offices at night. Janelle noticed the change immediately. Did something happen? She asked one evening. Renee forced a smile. Just a busy patch. Janelle didn't look convinced. You've been tired a lot. Renee sat beside her. Some things are hard before they get clear, she said. That doesn't mean they're wrong. Janelle nodded slowly, absorbing it the way kids do when they sense more than they're told. 2 days later, Claire called with urgency in her voice. The internal source reached out again, she said. They want to meet. Who are they? Renee asked. We don't know yet, Claire replied. But they're scared. They met in a parking garage downtown, concrete echoing every footstep. A woman waited near a pillar, hood pulled low. She introduced herself as Elaine. I worked compliance, Elaine said, for Donovan's company. Until last month. Renee studied her face. The tension there was familiar. They're shredding documents, Elaine continued. Not everything. Just enough. Why help us? Renee asked. Elaine's eyes flicked away. Because the man who died was my cousin. The air shifted. And because, Elaine added, I saw your name come up in an email. They said you'd be easy to break. Renee felt a cold clarity settle over her. So this is coordinated, she said. Yes, Elaine replied. And it's accelerating. Renee thought of the envelope. The job loss. The pressure closing in. Then we don't wait anymore, Renee said. Elaine nodded. Good. Because they won't. As Renee walked out of the garage, phone buzzing with missed calls she didn't recognize, she knew the next move wouldn't be hers alone. The story was breaking its silence. And once it did, there would be no putting it back. The story broke on a Tuesday. Not with headlines. Not with sirens. It slipped out the way truth often did, through a quiet filing, a docket update buried beneath celebrity divorces and zoning disputes. Claire called Renee just after noon. It's public, she said. The motion to reopen. It's live. Renee was wiping down desks at an insurance office downtown, the smell of disinfectant sharp in her nose. She stopped mid-wipe. So that's it, she said. That's the start, Claire corrected. And people are already asking questions. By evening the calls began. First from a local reporter. Then another. Then an email from a national outlet that covered corporate accountability. Each message was polite, curious, persistent. Renee didn't respond to any of them. She rode the bus home in silence, phone buzzing in her bag like a trapped insect. The city looked the same. Storefronts lit. People laughing outside a bar. A man arguing into a headset at the corner. Normal. At home, Lisa was already there pacing. They're talking about it online, Lisa said. Not names yet. Just new evidence. Renee set her bag down. It won't stay nameless. As if summoned by the words, her phone rang again. This time it was Donovan. They've scheduled an emergency board meeting, he said without preamble. They think this can still be contained. And can it? Renee asked. Pause. No. She appreciated the honesty. They're preparing a statement, Donovan continued. Sympathy. Cooperation. Internal review. Renee leaned against the counter. The usual. Yes, he said. And they want me to step down temporarily. To show good faith. Renee closed her eyes. And will you? Yes. The word landed heavier than she expected. You don't sound surprised, Donovan added. I am, Renee said. Just not the way you think. After the call, she sat at the table and stared at her hands. They were steady. That surprised her more than anything else. The next morning, the first article dropped. No faces. No names. Just facts laid out clean and unforgiving. A workplace fatality. Evidence suppressed. A settlement reached without disclosure. By afternoon, a second piece appeared. This one sharper. More detailed. By evening, the phone rang with a number Renee recognized. Mrs. Caldwell. Renee let it go to voicemail. The message came anyway. I don't know what you think you're doing, Mrs. Caldwell said, voice tight. But my attorney advises me to remind you of your confidentiality agreement. Renee listened to the message twice. Then she forwarded it to Claire. Claire called immediately. She shouldn't have done that, she said. Threatening contact helps us. Renee exhaled. So now I'm useful. You were always useful, Claire replied. They just underestimated you. That night, Renee sat with Janelle on the couch, both of them scrolling through different screens. Is this about you? Janelle asked quietly. Renee hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Janelle swallowed. Are we in trouble? Renee pulled her close. No, she said. We're just visible. Janelle leaned into her. You didn't do anything wrong. The words almost broke her. 2 days later, Elaine disappeared. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her email bounced back. Claire was calm but tense. We expected this. It doesn't mean she's gone for good. Just that the pressure worked. Renee felt a familiar anger rise. Not loud. Focused. The next filing included the documents Elaine had already shared. Enough to show pattern. Enough to show intent. The board statement followed hours later. Carefully worded. Regretful. Vague. And then, finally, a name surfaced. Not Renee's. Donovan Hale. The headline was everywhere. Tech investor faces scrutiny over suppressed safety reports. Renee stared at the screen, a strange mix of relief and dread settling in her chest. The sweater had started this. But now the story was bigger than both of them. And it was only just beginning to tell people who they really were. The attention changed things. Not all at once. At first it was subtle. A neighbor who suddenly avoided eye contact. A cashier who stared a second too long. Then the comments online sharpened, curiosity curdling into judgment. Renee learned quickly that protecting her name was harder than she'd imagined. It appeared first on a small blog, misspelled but unmistakable. A domestic worker. A relative of one of the deceased. A key witness. By the end of the week, it was being repeated correctly, lifted into larger outlets without context or care. Claire warned her this would happen. That didn't soften the impact. You can step back at any point, Claire said over the phone. Legally, you're allowed. Renee stood at the kitchen window, watching Janelle walk home from school. Her daughter's backpack bounced against her shoulders, headphones on, unaware of the weight pressing in from every direction. I won't, Renee said quietly. Not now. The day Donovan stepped down became a spectacle. News vans lined the street outside his office. Analysts debated sincerity like it was a game. Stock prices flickered at the bottom of the screen, detached from the people underneath them. Renee didn't hear from him that day. She saw him instead on a television mounted above the folding tables at the laundromat. He stood at a podium, jaw tight, reading from a statement that wasn't his. I take responsibility, Donovan said. Not because it's convenient, but because it's necessary. Renee folded towels, her hands moving on autopilot. She believed him. That realization unsettled her more than doubt would have. As the case gained traction, more families came forward. Similar stories. Similar timelines. Safety complaints quietly closed. Settlements framed as generosity rather than avoidance. Patterns emerged that couldn't be dismissed as coincidence. And then the counterattack arrived. An article questioned Renee's work history. Suggested financial motivation. Quoted an unnamed source describing her as emotionally involved and unstable. Janelle found it before Renee did. Mom, she said, holding up her phone, eyes wide. Is this about you? Renee took a slow breath. They're trying to make me look unreliable. Why? Janelle asked. Because facts alone aren't always enough, Renee said. People like stories better. Janelle frowned. That's stupid. Renee smiled faintly. It is. The next blow came in the mail. A formal letter from the agency, citing breach of contract and threatening legal action. They demanded damages and warned of further consequences. Claire didn't hesitate. They're bluffing, she said. And if they're not, we counter. They want to scare you quiet. Renee nodded, but the strain was beginning to show. Lost work. Legal costs. The constant vigilance. That night, Donovan called. I didn't want to complicate things, he said. But you should know, they offered to reinstate me if I publicly discredit you. Renee closed her eyes. And, she asked. I said no. Silence stretched between them. Why tell me? Renee asked. Because I don't want secrets anymore, Donovan said. And because what this is costing you isn't invisible to me. It's costing you too, Renee replied. Yes, he said. But not in the same ways. After the call, Renee sat alone in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She thought of the snow, of the sweater, of how small that moment had seemed. The court date was set quietly, months away. Enough time for pressure to build. Enough time for people to forget why this started. Enough time for someone to try to end it another way. As Renee turned off the light, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. If you care about your daughter, you'll stop. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't about reputation anymore. It was about fear. And someone had decided to aim it where it would hurt most. Renee didn't sleep. The message replayed in her mind every time she closed her eyes. Not the words themselves, but the certainty behind them. Someone had crossed a line from reputation to intimidation, from strategy to threat. She deleted the message after forwarding it to Claire. Then she sat at the kitchen table until morning, phone face down, coffee untouched. When Janelle woke up, Renee acted normal. Packed lunch. Asked about a quiz. Listened to complaints about a substitute teacher. She waited until the door closed behind her before allowing her hands to shake. Claire called at 9. This changes things, she said. We treat this as witness intimidation. Can you prove it? Renee asked. Not yet, Claire replied. But the timing matters. And the language matters. Renee looked at the empty chair across from her. They mentioned my daughter. Yes, Claire said. Which means they want leverage, not silence. That's important. How? Renee asked. Because people who want you gone don't warn you, Claire said. They make you disappear. The words settled heavily. Security measures followed. Quiet ones. A new routine. Different routes. Check-ins that felt excessive until they didn't. Donovan called that afternoon. I was told not to contact you, he said. But I need to know, are you safe? As safe as I was yesterday, Renee replied. That's not an answer, he said. No, she agreed. It's the truth. He exhaled slowly. My former board chair reached out. He suggested this could all end if I convinced you to withdraw. And did you? Renee asked. I told him I don't control you, Donovan said. And that if anything happens to you or your family, it won't stay quiet. Renee believed him. That also scared her. The next article dropped 2 days later. This one focused on Donovan's past deals, not her. Emails leaked. Dates cross-checked. The narrative shifted subtly but meaningfully. Pressure rolled uphill. Then Elaine resurfaced. She emailed Claire from an encrypted account with one line. They're panicking. And someone's freelancing. They met again, this time in a crowded food court where anonymity came from noise and motion. Elaine looked thinner. More alert. The threats aren't official, she said without preamble. They're not sanctioned by the board. Then who? Renee asked. Elaine hesitated. Risk management. External consultants. People paid to make problems uncomfortable. Renee felt her jaw tighten. And the message about my daughter? Elaine nodded. That wasn't cleared. It was meant to scare you into backing out quietly. Why now? Renee asked. Because discovery is next, Elaine said. And once emails are subpoenaed, names come out. Including theirs. That night, Renee sat on Janelle's bed while she did homework. Has anyone talked to you? Renee asked casually. At school. Online. Janelle shook her head. Why? No reason, Renee said. Just checking. Janelle looked up. You're lying. Renee smiled sadly. I know. She didn't tell her about the message. She wouldn't. Fear shared too early had a way of shaping kids in ways that never went away. Instead, Renee made a decision. She called the reporter she'd ignored weeks earlier. They met in a public library, surrounded by people who weren't listening. Renee didn't give documents. She gave context. Dates. Patterns. The cost of silence. If I disappear from this, Renee said, it won't be because I changed my mind. The reporter didn't smile. That's a strong statement. It's an honest one, Renee replied. The piece didn't run immediately, but word traveled. The next morning, Donovan's phone rang before sunrise. They're calling an emergency vote, he told Renee later, to distance the company entirely. They're preparing to cooperate. That's good, Renee said. Yes, Donovan replied. And it's dangerous. For who? She asked. For anyone who knows where the bodies are buried, he said. Because cooperation requires sacrifices. That evening, as Renee walked home from the bus stop, she noticed a car idling at the corner. Engine running. Headlights off. It pulled away when she slowed. She stood still, heart racing, the cold creeping up through her shoes. Her phone buzzed. A new message. You were warned. Court makes things messy. Renee didn't respond. She walked the rest of the way home with her head high, pulse loud in her ears. They wanted fear. They wanted retreat. Instead, Renee felt something else rising. Defiance. And the quiet certainty that whatever came next would no longer be contained behind closed doors. The courtroom was smaller than Renee expected. No grand columns. No dramatic hush. Just rows of wooden benches, fluorescent lights, and the steady rhythm of procedure. Ordinary. Almost disappointing, considering how much fear had been packed into the months leading here. Renee sat beside Claire, hands folded in her lap. Lisa sat behind them, fingers laced together so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. Janelle was at school, deliberately kept away from this room, from this moment. Donovan entered from the opposite side. No cameras were allowed inside, but Renee felt the weight of the attention anyway. He looked thinner than before. Not fragile, just stripped of insulation. When their eyes met briefly, he nodded. Not as a signal. Just acknowledgement. The judge called the case. And just like that, the story stopped being rumor. Documents were entered into record. Maintenance logs. Emails. Timelines that didn't bend when lawyers pushed them. Elaine's testimony followed, calm and devastating in its precision. The altered files. The internal warnings. The pressure to reclassify risk as acceptable loss. When it was Renee's turn, she stood slowly. Her voice didn't shake. She spoke about Mrs. Caldwell's house. The loose railing. The chemicals without labels. The agency's warnings not to complain if she wanted to stay employed. She spoke about slipping on the stairs and deciding not to report it because she couldn't afford to lose work. No speeches. No anger. Just facts placed carefully where silence used to be. Then Lisa spoke. She described the night her husband didn't come home. The call. The settlement that arrived before grief had settled. The way questions were treated like inconveniences. The courtroom stayed quiet. Not out of respect. Out of attention. By midday, the company's counsel requested a recess. By mid-afternoon, they requested mediation. By the end of the day, the word settlement was back. But this time, it didn't sound like a muzzle. It sounded like admission. Weeks later, the outcome became public. The company agreed to reopen multiple cases. Independent oversight was mandated. Families received compensation tied not to silence, but to accountability. Donovan formally severed his remaining leadership ties and funded, publicly this time, an independent safety review board with no corporate veto power. People argued about whether it was enough. Renee didn't join those conversations. Her life didn't transform overnight. No miracle offers appeared. No sudden ease followed. She still cleaned offices. Still budgeted carefully. Still worried about Janelle. But some things were different. The agency quietly withdrew its threat. Mrs. Caldwell's attorney never contacted her again. And once, while waiting for the bus, a woman recognized her and said, "My sister worked somewhere like that. Thank you for not backing down." That mattered more than headlines. Donovan sent one final message months later. No explanations. No apologies. Just this. I'm alive because you didn't look away. I'm accountable because you didn't either. Renee didn't reply. She folded the message into memory where it belonged. One winter morning, as snow dusted the sidewalks again, Renee walked past the spot where she'd once stopped for a stranger. The city had changed little. People hurried by, heads down, cold biting. She stood there for a moment, hands in her pockets. She thought about how close she'd come to keeping the sweater, about how small the choice had felt, about how many lives had quietly shifted because she hadn't. Then she turned and kept walking. Some stories don't end with riches. They end with truth. And sometimes, that's the only thing that ever really belonged to you. If this story stayed with you, take a moment to support the channel. Subscribe for more real human stories that don't look away. And if you've ever witnessed a small act that changed more than it should have, you're not alone, and you're always welcome to share.